so excited for you all to be here and share our love for infrared photography. And it's really fascinating how infrared has just been booming. I mean, people love it. They're looking for something different, especially during COVID. I think where our expressions are different, our feelings are different. And so infrared is pretty much a fabulous, it's not pretty much, it's a fabulous expression of what we're going through. And also it's a great thing to play with. So we are the Invisible Team, and it's artistic infrared photography. And we've been together for 10 years now, Shell, something like that.
Just about, yeah, I think it's about 10. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And actually, Shelley was a student of mine during a workshop, and just were totally enamored by infrared, correct? And
yes.
Then, yep. And then things happened.
Yeah, sorry, I picked up an infrared camera for the first time in Laurie's class and never put one down. I was immediately addicted.
Yeah, yeah. And I learned infrared I was in undergraduate school. I was a biomedical photographer, and we used it for diagnostic and research purposes. And I didn't realize it had any artistic bent to it at all. And I was just really enamored with it, and had the opportunity to study with Ansel Adams. And that's when I realized that it was used, because he did infrared large format film, and I was just totally hooked. And then in grad school, that was what I did. This is my voice, is infrared. It always has been. I would say 95% of the images that I make are infrared, and then sometimes I dabble with other things. So it's the way I see, and that's the oxymoron, because it is invisible, you know. So that's what I feel, and that's what I communicate. And the wonderful thing about Shelley and me is that we're really opposite. I mean, from curly hair to straight hair to, technology. I mean, you have a technical question, ask Shelley, because she can just explain it so easily and so wonderfully. And if you want to, and I do the creative part. What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What do you want to communicate? So what is really great is we complement each other really well, because, and at the beginning it was like, well, Shelley, what do you feel? What are you trying to say with your images? And it was less like, well, she does it through the technology of post-production, and she's brilliant at it. And so she's taught me now how I can tap into my voice with the post-production. And I will ask her, well, why did you use this subject? And, what are you doing with your images? And so I think too, I think it's just a really great system to have somebody that complements you so well. And that's why we are the Invisible Team. And we're the Invisible Team in that we are working in a non-visible spectrum, and we are so opposite each other. And we do get to teach all over the world, which has been very exciting. And we love the Nik filters, because they are just so wonderful for what we do. So we're going to go to the next slide.
Okay, just a little bit on my background before we go, Laurie.
Sure.
I am a corporate nerd. I spent most of my adult life working for major corporations like Bank of America, Neiman Marcus, and Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, and spent a significant portion of that working in technology with a variety of systems. That's how I have translated to the technology of photography. It is one of my main loves, and one of the big differences between Laurie and I is that Laurie's artistic nature is geared toward composition and capture, and mine, I view the post-processing as my favorite part of the whole process. I'd rather do that than be out in the field.
That's so fascinating, but it's the complement, and that's what's really amazing.
Right.
Okay.
So what is infrared photography? Probably most of you know that the light spectrum expands far beyond what we can see with our eyes. Below the visible spectrum, we have UV light, and above the visible spectrum, we have infrared light. For all of the night goggle images and things you've seen with the green, those are what's called far infrared images. They are beyond the 1200 nanometer end of the range. What we use in artistic infrared photography is the range between 700 and 1200, really honestly more between 700 and about 950. But it's close enough to the visible that sometimes we get a benefit of having some of the visible light bleed over into the infrared images. So just to give you a real quick highlight of what the difference is. This is the same composition taken 3 different ways. In color on the left, in black and white in the middle, and in infrared on the right. And you'll see the amazing difference in reflectivity of the water and the grass on the right-hand side. Infrared stereotypically or traditionally has been all about foliage, the white foliage that you get with infrared, and because living organisms are usually much more reflective in infrared light. So this is one of Laurie's beautiful images taken at her son's wedding, and that tree is just magnificent, so much more magnificent than it would have been in regular visible light. This is one of my images, and this is another really interesting feature of infrared. Because of the difference in the way light reflects, you get these amazing contrasts. This was taken at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a very sunny Dallas day. But you'll see that the sky went totally dark, the foliage went really light, and it allows you to really make advantage of that negative space in that image. So Laurie?
So why infrared? So infrared gives us artistic opportunities that we may not get in other formats. It is an opportunity for you to create your own vision of the world. As I said at the beginning, I see in the non-visible spectrum, and it's not reality, it's dreamlike. I was a wedding photographer for 25 years, and I was known for my infrared photography, and it's very dramatic. Also, when we shoot in infrared, it's not the same time of day that we would want to shoot color in black and white, because we need a lot of light. We need, you know, on overcast days, it's okay, but it doesn't have the drama that that infrared does. So we're going to show you. So these are images that I've taken. This was kind of a surprise. Like I said, I like to tell stories with my photography, and I knew we were going to have a major snowstorm. This is in Woodbury, Connecticut, and we have a graveyard that is really, really old. And I got up really early in the morning, just when the sun was coming out. The snowstorm was just ending. So this was very deliberate. And I went out and photographed, and I just loved the tree and how it was watching over the gravestones, and the gravestones being very separate and isolated, and the negative space in between. And I did do a little bit of channel swapping on this to make the colors more dreamlike. And again, the sun is really important. Where is it at? We get a lot of flare with infrared, so you have to be careful of that. But I love the drama that was created this morning in this image. And then for the next one, so photographing in snow and in the winter is not really what you do with infrared, because the springtime and the summer are the most glorious time, in early fall for infrared. But I've learned the rules, and I think it's very, very important to learn the rules so you can break them. So this was another snowstorms in Connecticut about 2 or 3 years later, and what that is on the right is snow. So I didn't know what was going to so I've been doing infrared for 50 years, and I don't get bored. I was really mad when Kodak stopped, when they stopped creating Kodak HIE film, and excuse me. And so there was no more infrared, and I did hoard it, and I still have some in my freezer, but I had to learn how to do digital. And so I didn't know what it was going to look like. Would it be translucent? What would the shell? Would I pick up colors? So again, even with, I do a 720 conversion, so you still can pull up a little bit of colors. And I just find this very magical and a little bit haunting. And as you can see, that's kind of a thread in the type of imagery that I make. And so with the next one, excuse me, this was during one of our last workshops before COVID. We were down in Louisiana, and these were slave quarters. And I stood there for a while to think about what that felt like. What does this mean? And, the drama. And I actually came back a little bit later because I wanted the shadows, because to me, it was about shadows of the past. And so again, I'm very deliberate in my content. Sometimes it's just feelings, and later on I figure out what it was. And I liked having, you know, a little bit the native color and these extra colors in it because it added to the drama. And this is a really strong image to me in terms of composition and storytelling. This is a very recent image. This was during a snowstorm in Philly. I was down visiting my children, and it was a dead rose bush, but it was right at the end of winter. And I'm like, oh, the possibilities. And again, we were all going through, what are the new possibilities? What is the potential? This is not my typical IR type of imagery, but I had to, you know, I knew what I was feeling. And so I knew I needed to use the brown tones and the blue tones, the native colors, bring them out. And there's some vignetting, and we'll talk about a little bit later on what is necessary in post-production for your images. But I liked it because it had, again, a haunting feeling about, but it was about death allowing for new birth.
This is one of my images. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laurie.
I was just going to say, this is one of your images.
Yeah, this was taken on Cape Cod on a beach that some of you may know. It's called Ballston Beach, as one of those magnificent Atlantic storms rolled in. And one of the things I love about infrared that really captures me, and I'll tell you, I have a Canon 5D that I have used for many years that is sitting in a bag in my closet and has been there for about 2 years because I am so enamored with infrared that I hardly ever shoot anything else. So I took my infrared camera out to the beach on this cloudy, really dark looking day. And the light that you get, the reflectivity, the unusual appearance, you know, it tends to magnify clouds and the depth in the clouds and the details in the shoreline, in the sand. So it just was a magnificent opportunity to me. Oh, sorry, there we go. One of the things, we're showing you a whole set of images here to really illustrate how artistic you can get with infrared. You know, lots of people think that infrared is simply the black and white that you see with the white foliage, or the false colors of infrared. You've probably seen a lot of images online that have pink foliage and orange foliage and purple. But it goes beyond that. It's a great, great palette for doing really artistic rendering. I started doing compositing with infrared images because they just provide a different feel for the base of these types of treatments. I also do a lot of intentional camera movement with infrared. This was a set of grasses growing near a coastal forest, and it had all these vertical lines in it. And so I began to play with the motion to see what kind of treatment I could get out of it. So I was really thrilled with this. And because of the infrared, it brought the grasses in the front forward to be the main subject. So again, it's a purely artistic genre. One of the things I tell every class we have is that no human eye has seen the invisible light of infrared. Because of that, no one can tell you what color that tree should be. No one can tell you what color the sky should be. No one has ever seen it in infrared. So there isn't, like there is with visible photography, the ability for others to look at your work and say, oh, you got that wrong. Oh, you interpreted that incorrectly. It is a purely artistic genre. The only measure of success is how well it expresses your artistic vision. Laura?
So one of the things with infrared too is that because it's not predictable, we need to play. And I think that that's what, you know, I see the students that we have, and they just go out and play because they don't have preconceived ideas. And sometimes that is just a wonderful thing. Be childlike, because we don't know, and be open to surprises. I do a lot of, I love photographing people in the landscape, and I'll talk more about that later. But for me, this was a girl, I get to know my models a lot beforehand, and she was like going through a lot. and I could just feel the stress and some of the pain that she was feeling. And I wanted to capture that in the image and yet be open enough so that people could bring their own stories in. So what I did is I wanted her eyes closed because, again, eyes can be very haunting in infrared. And I did darken this a little more so you don't have that really, really opaque white that we usually get with people. And then I made sure that the lines of the leaves were going in the same direction right across her face. And she's hidden, but what is she thinking? So again, it's a story, and yet it's a story. And I do that. I do a lot of method acting and role playing. When I do my photography and I work with models, which again I'll talk about in a little while, but I direct a lot, and a lot of times I think that's why I love infrared and I have been doing it so long. There is always a surprise. I mean, that's one of the things. So the next image was during a pop-up workshop that I was doing in Connecticut, and I really think working with a muse, the same model over and over again, is really wonderful. And she must have run on this hill in this field probably 10 times before I could get the image right. This is channel swapped, which gives you the garish colors. I do use a 720 conversion. I have a 5D, I have a 6D Canon, and I also have a full spectrum camera. But it was really important, where does her head fall? I wanted separation. If it had fallen in the dark area, it wouldn't have had great separation. So I am an incredibly deliberate image maker. Everything in my image is there for one of two reasons, which is composition and content. And this was just, I wanted her to be like fluid, and almost her dress looks like one of the clouds. So it just really, really blended in together. This is an earlier image of mine when I first got my camera converted. I wasn't sure that I would love it because I was still in this love-hate relationship with Kodak about, why they discontinued using the film, which was really kind of silly of me. But when your voice is a certain thing and then all of a sudden we're going digital and we don't have infrared, it was very frustrating. And actually Nik Filters was what saved me. So this image was really, it's a digital image that I really, I wanted to assimilate what HIE Kodak film would look like. So it has the grain, it has the glow, and we'll be talking about this in a little while. And I want it to be very, very dramatic because look at this house. It's in its prime, it had to be absolutely magnificent. And the windows are broken. The windows are not there. They're openings. And so I wanted the viewer to be able to bring their own stories in it and really feel it. And that's one of the things that I really think that infrared can do, is it really elicits feelings to the viewer and obviously to the photographer.
Okay, this is one of my images, and this was taken also at our last workshop before COVID in the Atchafalaya region of Louisiana. We were at a lovely plantation, and there were the pictures you might expect, the ones of the front of the plantation with the draping oaks, etc. And then I turned around and saw this tree in the background and was just mesmerized by it because it was kind of standing alone with a nice backdrop. So when I got into post, I knew I wanted it to feel ethereal, and I knew that I wanted it to have some soft colors, and I went through a normal process and came up with something I liked. But I put this in here to talk to you about the value of play, and especially with software like Nik. I opened this after I had already done a treatment to it and applied a preset, and then saved it and came back in and applied a second, was just looking, and all of a sudden it was a happy accident. I saw one preset laid on top of the other preset and went, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So if you think I had this in mind when I first started, no, it was a journey of experimentation to get to something unique and special to me. So infrared, the magic is in the way objects, textures, and colors reflect infrared light. As you've seen already, trees reflect very differently. People reflect very differently. Laurie's going to show you a number of her portraits. She is very much a people photographer, whereas I am not. But infrared reflects so interestingly from skin, because it actually reflects from a layer below the surface. So you get certain things disappear and some other things are accentuated, but it's really incredible. So like I said, landscape and foliage are the most common subjects that you see when you see infrared images. And there's a good reason why. This image in color would not be nearly as appealing without that tree standing out as such a unique component in the center of the image. This is one of Laurie's images from some time ago, and you can see there, this would have not have been nearly as appealing in color or even in black and white. But with infrared, the foliage became the star, and it has that traditional infrared glow. But the artistic impact of infrared doesn't stop with foliage and landscapes. You know, I highly recommend that if you do shoot an infrared or you decide to try it out, just take your camera and photograph all sorts of things to see what will happen, because sometimes it can be a great surprise. I was in Japan photographing the snow monkeys. I took my infrared camera along just for the fun of it. I snapped this image thinking, you know, I don't know if infrared will do any good. We're in the dead of winter. There's no green foliage. There's nothing around that you would think. The rocks are certainly not that reflective, but it actually made the fur on the monkeys almost glow. So I was really surprised and pleased with the end result. This is one that Laurie took of an emu, and you can see it has such a different feel. And one of the lovely things about infrared is that it really does bring out textures. Here's another one I took in Japan of a swan coming in for a landing. And the tonal quality and the reflection just really worked in infrared. So Laurie, you want to talk about people?
People, yes. So I was a landscape photographer. Obviously, studying with Ansel Adams totally changed everything because I had learned infrared for medical and diagnostic purposes. And so I'm realizing, you know, as I said before, seeing his landscapes, you know, I was doing black and white landscapes, but when I saw his infrared, I was just hooked. And so basically in graduate school, I became a landscape photographer doing infrared. And then I realized what started happening, especially because I started doing weddings. I was a single mom and was supporting 2 kids by myself on my photography. So that was kind of unique. But what happened was I would be in a landscape, I'd be walking with somebody and I'd say, oh, I could put a person here. Oh, I could put a person there. And I knew I could pre-visualize, you know, I don't want to have trees because you have tree barks behind, you know, your subject. The tree bark is going to go dark. So to really learn what happens and how it's converted with infrared is really, really important. So this is my son and my daughter-in-law, and he was wearing a chocolate colored shirt. So the chocolate came out whitish. And so we don't always know. That's why when I do a lot of work with a lot of models or was doing weddings, I would have people bring their clothing so I could take a picture to see what it was going to look like in infrared, because again, we don't know. Synthetics come out differently than wool. And so my daughter-in-law's dress was champagne. So that's really important to know, to be able to know and foresee what the image is going to look like. I also wanted, I was laying on the ground because I liked the way that it had rained and it was really dramatic, but I liked how the sky was parting. So again, I am a storyteller, I am deliberate, and I wanted to make sure my son's head was right in that place because it was almost like parting of the clouds, and also with her that she just had incredible trust and faith in this situation and their marriage. And so again, there's the storytelling. So everything's deliberate. I can't say that I'm analytical, that I think of all that when I'm shooting. I'm aware of it. And for me, it's more of a gut thing, is that I know it and I know where to put people. This one was taken during our last Santa Fe photographic workshops class, and we were doing the female form in the Santa Fe landscape. And this was a new model I had worked with. I do bring props. She has water behind her because she was actually in a pool, because I know water goes dark. and I wanted her to be isolated. So if there was a tree behind her, it would have become very busy. So I have to be very careful again about my backgrounds and where to place people. And I just love this, you know, with the post-production where I was able to get a little bit of red and a little bit of skin tone. And then the way her left eye is kind of covered and looking off to a different side. So it tells stories, and everybody can, you know, kind of interpret it the way they want to. And also I love just where on the bottom of her chin, how there's the pattern of the lace that becomes dark. And so it just tells a very different story than if it was just straight on portrait. So in the next image, the reason I put this in is skin tone types is very different. So in infrared penetrates the top layer of the skin. And in this is in the Bahamas, and this was a Bahamian man, very black skin. And what happens is that it penetrates the layer, and there are red pigments in skin. So his skin tone came out very light. And so that's a good thing too to know beforehand. Maybe take a picture so that you know what the skin tone is going to look like. This is very early in the morning. As I said before, I love the early morning light or the late afternoon light. It is just perfect for infrared. This is late afternoon. I do a lot of bodies in water. I was working on a project called Boundaries because I realized I wasn't having a lot of boundaries in those days. And so I put my model in there, and I wanted to silhouette her, but I also made sure that the fabric was wet so that you could see through it. So again, if this was color or this was black and white, it would have too much detail. So I feel with an image like this, it's interpretive. And I did have her move around a little bit, so there were many circles around her that imitated the hula hoop that she was in. So again, play. And do scenarios, do role playing, method acting. It's a great way to just see what you want to do and come up with non-static imagery. This is with Analog, which we will be, hopefully we have time and we'll be going through that a little bit. And it's kind of false colors. So I teach the female form in the main landscape for main media. And we found all of these dead trees and all these roots that are uprooted and they were uprooted. And so I was trying to figure out where to put her and how could she just totally trust nature. So again, I do a scenario. I want the background where it's not busy because again, where do I want my eye to go? And if you look at photographs upside down, I don't know if you guys do that, but especially with infrared, it tells you the story and you can see if everything is in that image for one of two reasons. But again, the landscape spoke to me and then I knew where to put the person. And actually from doing weddings for 25 years, I learned really well on where people could be in the landscape and what's calling for a live person to be someplace. This is Shelley's image, and we wanted to put this in because we find this is something that happens a lot for us. Most of our models these days are tattooed. And tattoos with infrared is a whole nother ball game because what happens is that they're usually blue to green inks, and those inks, because they're opposite of the on the spectrum from infrared and the reds and the orange and the yellows. So what happens is that you have to take that into accountability because the tattoo becomes a huge part of the composition, because as you see your eye goes to her eyes, her mouth, but then right down to the tattoo. So we do a lot of testing. I test fabric and I test tattoos to see what it's going to look like, because again, it's an element in your image, because like I said before, everything has to be in your image for one of two reasons. She also has red hair, and that has a tendency to be lighter. So again, make tests. So dramatic storytelling is the marriage of capture and post-production. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that, as I said before, that the Invisible Story team works on. A great photograph is one that really expresses what one feels in the deepest sense about what is being photographed. And I think you need to think about that. That's a great saying, live with it, because intentionality is really important.
Okay, so one of the things about infrared, and if you're already doing infrared, you know this is true, is that post-processing is an absolute must. You know, visible spectrum photographers can often get away with, minimal processing or shooting JPEG and do no processing. There are options there, but with infrared, it's really critical. You cannot get a really rich, artistic, good-looking image in infrared without doing some processing, sometimes more than just a little. The basic factors of good photography apply to infrared images. You need to have a good composition. I can't tell you how many times we see images online that the false colors of infrared are used to try and save a not very interesting composition. So you really need to pay attention to your composition and content, as Laurie said. You need to have a good exposure. You need to have the full range of tones to work with. Good contrast, good sharpness, good clarity. So all of these are things you would do for any basic photograph, and they certainly apply for infrared. But there are extra things that you need to do in infrared. One of those is custom white balance. Because you're outside the visible spectrum, and because most software has been written for the visible spectrum, we actually have to jump through some hoops to get a decent white balance in your infrared image. There's lots of literature out on the web on how to do this. We have a free handout you can download from Laurie's website that talks about how to do it. But you have to set a custom white balance, and that's done using a custom camera profile. That's too complex for us to go into here, but like I said, the information is available. Then you also need to decide on color treatment. Are you going to use the native color that came out of the camera, which is usually an assortment of tans and blues? Are you going to convert it to black and white? Are you going to do the channel swapping and get the bright blue skies and the white foliage or the pink foliage, or whatever your preference is? Or are you going to just simply tone it, apply different colors to it? You need to make sure you have some good structure. Infrared images often come out very soft and flat. It's just the nature of the beast with the changes that are made to your camera. Traditional infrared had a lot of grain, so some people really like to add that back in their infrared images, because the features of the film that cause the grain don't exist when you're working in digital. So you would have to add that in if you want it. And the infrared glow. Infrared glow was characteristic of an infrared image in the film days. And it was because of, without going into a lot of detail, some of the characteristics of infrared film. So you had a characteristic soft glow around bright areas in the image. A lot of digital artists, Laurie and I included, choose to add a glow to get more of that traditional infrared look. Here's an example. On the left is an image with no glow, and the same image with a heavy glow on the right. I am very fond of heavy glow. Laurie is not. That's one of the differences you'll see in our images. She tends to use a more moderate glow, but even just a small amount of glow adds an infrared, or enhances, I should say, the infrared feeling of your image.
So we use Nik to get our creative results, and it is adding the artistic magic. And as I said, it was a lifesaver when Kodak stopped making HIE film, and it was just it was brilliant, because I'm not working in a dark room, I'm not shooting film, and now I have to go into another medium, and if this is my lifeline, this is my expression, what do I do? So it was really it was scary for a while. So what we're going to do is we're going to show some images that are pretty much taken out of the camera when we upload them. And so they'll be before Nik. So you can see there is some native color, which is brown and blues. We like that at times, because I like contrasting like warm tones, cool tones in some images, but again, it depends what it's saying. But it's pretty flat. And one of the things that are indicative, Shelley said, is the structure. So I love the trees, and also negative space. The space in between is really, really important with infrared images. So you want to retain that. So this is a pretty boring post-production. And so here it is using Nik's Silver Efex Pro. That's what I learned on. there are certain things that you need to have structure, you need to have glow, and you need to have a vignetting. And that's the three things that I use almost every image for post-production. But see the drama and how it feels and it comes to life. So it's really important for what are you trying to say with your images. You say something in capture. Now, how do you take it to the next step with post-production? So this one, this was in Morocco. Shelley and I led a tour there, photo tour, and this is in a gardens in Marrakesh. And this is very common, especially when there's no light on an infrared image. It's backlit here, where it's really flat. It's really boring. So we had to go in. So this is before Nik, and then when we go into Color Efex Pro, because again, I like to keep some of the color. I like the native color. There's a tremendous amount of structure in this picture because it just pops. And with the other, it was kind of boring and bland. So you as the photographer are leading your whoever's looking at your images, their eye around and where you want their eye to go. So this has just such a, and it is kind of breaking the rules because you really want to photograph in very bright sunlight, but you still can make a very interesting image if there isn't direct sunlight on the image. So this is these are the cows that I just love. This cow literally came up to me, stopped short, and I think it saw its reflection in the lens of my camera. So with this image, I wanted to do channel swapping because I thought, black and white would be fun, but what if I channel swap? So I did the channel swap before I put it into Nik, and it's kind of flat. But when I put it into Color Efex Pro, look what I could do. I added, again, I added, structure, I added glow, and I changed my lighting around a little bit, the coloring around a little bit. And I think it's a fascinating image. And we really both like the channel swapping and then playing with it in Color Efex Pro. So this is during a workshop, and I was showing my students how to work with a dancer, and the color, she had this really interesting color fabric that she was working with, and I did not know. I also don't know all the times what things are going to look like until I get it into into post-production. And so this is before Nik, and then the next one is with Nik Analog. So it's Nik Analog Efex Pro, and I love this. You can see how her face is still a little bit of blue because that's because she had fabric over it. But again, I love complementary colors. So you've got kind of this yellowish brown. At the same time, you've got this bluish purple. And it just gives it so much more life. And again, the structure, we need to have those certain things, the structure and glow and the vignetting all the time. And then the rest can become interpretive. And analog, man, we've been playing with this a lot lately, and it is crazy the fun things that we are coming up with in analog.
So I took this image. I am not a flower photographer, never have been, but I was out with a friend, flower or plant shopping, I should say, this spring, and I thought, what the heck? Because usually, flowers in infrared just come out flat and boring. You don't get any of the colors. You don't get anything like that. So it's really based on the texture and the structure. So I started playing, and I took this image, and the way the leaves or the petals of this flower flowed really appealed to me. But I thought it was just kind of an okay image, not anything spectacular. So I took it into Analog Efex Pro and found the perfect solution to me to really give it the pizzazz and the depth that it needed. This is an image I took on Cape Cod again, looking at a storm coming over the dunes. I love the clouds. I love the drama in it. I am very much a drama person, and so I really liked the image itself, but as with so many infrared images, it's pretty flat and not a lot of emphasis on the textures or details. So I took it into Color Efex Pro and then into Analog Efex Pro to make some changes to it, to add structure, to add glow, to add texture, and give it more depth. Okay, so that's, we've been feeding you through a fire hose, I think, but um, this is where you can go for more information. You know, there's so much more available and so much more that you really need to know about infrared. So if you visit Laurie's website, you can find our upcoming workshops and events. We have an infrared workshop coming up in the fall. We offer it usually twice a year. There also are a number of free downloadable resources that can help you out. If those don't answer your questions, we highly recommend, of course, our book that came out last year. We updated it completely for all the latest techniques and software and equipment that are available. It takes you from the very beginning of choosing how to experiment with infrared all the way through post-processing. And of course, feel free to email us through Laurie's website if there are questions that you specifically need help with. Okay, so now we're going to launch into some live demos. And Laurie, we have about 20 minutes. So I am going to switch over to Photoshop and do the first one, and then I will be handing off to Laurie to do several. Give me just a moment to get this open. Okay, so this is an image I took in Atchafalaya again in Louisiana. I love, one of my favorite things about infrared is the way reflections look. You know, in color, if you saw this with the naked eye, you see the reflections, but they're not really pronounced. In infrared, they just tend to pop, and that's because of the way infrared penetrates the water. It doesn't go deep into water. It gets reflected near the surface, so all the things that are underneath the surface don't show up, and it emphasizes the reflection that is on the surface. So I wanted this image, I thought it would look really nice in color, so I channel swapped. And I want to talk to you a minute about what you have to do before Nik. There are some things that we've been talking about that are inherent in processing infrared images that you can't do in Nik. You actually can only do in certain applications, and some of them you can only do in Photoshop. But one of the first things is that you do need, especially if you're going to channel swap, you need a good white balance. If this image isn't white balanced ahead of time, you're going to come out with some really strange colors. Sometimes that can be artistically appealing, but usually you want that good foundation to start with. That's done with a custom camera profile that's applied in Lightroom or Photoshop. I'm not sure if any other applications make use of the profiles. I don't know of any right offhand. You also want to do any of your basic exposure tweaks and repairs, you know, removing any obstacles, any things that detract from the viewer's experience with the image. And channel swapping. Channel swapping is done with either a channel mixer tool or using a LUT similar to the LUTs that we have developed and have available on Laurie's website. So any application that can use a LUT, you can do channel swapping in. And if you don't know what a LUT is, it's a lookup table. It's something that's been used in videography for many years and is becoming very popular in regular photography. But it basically is a map that tells your software to change one color to another color. But you have to do that before you get to Nik. So in this case, with this image, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a what they call a stamp layer, which is just an imprint of all the changes I've made in the previous layers. And I'm going to convert that to a smart object. The reason I'm doing that is it gives me the ability then to take it over to Nik, make whatever changes I want. And if I want to go back and revise those at a later time, it will let me. So now I go up to Filter, Nik, and in this particular image, I am going to take it into Silver Efex Pro. Okay, so the first thing I do is get rid of whatever was there from the last time I was playing in Silver Efex Pro. And for this one, I have certain things that I use a lot, so I have them set up as favorites. And I will go into Pro Contrast first because I want this to have a little more contrast, will be a little more dynamic. And I'm going to go up here to correct contrast and take it up to about 35 to get more detail and more drama in the image, frankly. And then I'm going to take dynamic contrast and move that up to about 10%. Okay, holding the shift key down, I'm going to go over here and click on polarization because I want the sky to really be emphasized. I love the blue in the sky. And I'm going to change the settings here, rotate, I'm going to take it down to about 16. And then the strength of that effect, I'm going to take up to 60 because the higher the strength, the bluer the sky gets with polarization. That's good enough right in there. Okay, holding the shift key down again, I'm going to pull up the Glamour Glow to add that characteristic infrared glow that we were talking about. I like more glow than Laurie does, as I said. Sometimes I will go really heavy. In this image, that does not work. It works a little more subtly for this one. So I'm going to set it at about 23% glow and take the warmth down a little because there's nothing that I want warm in this image. I want my foliage white and I want my water blue. So I'm going to pull it down just a little to emphasize that. Now, most infrared images really benefit from a vignette. Some people don't care for vignettes. I think they're really useful because they keep the viewer's eye in your image. For this one, because it's a pretty straight landscape, I don't want a huge vignette. So I'm going to change this to 24%, minus 24%. I really just want it on the corners or the edges to keep the viewer's eye in the frame. To do that, I'm going to change this more toward rectangle, so it's really just hitting the edges. And for size, I'm going to take it down to about 24. So you can see now it's not bothering the interior of the image, but it is giving you just a little darkness along the edges to keep your eye in the frame. The next thing I'm going to do with these changes, you'll see that these areas right here and here have gone pretty dark. An easy way for me to fix that is to use the high key filter and then go in and drop a control point just on those areas that I want the high key to bring up the tones. So I'm going to bring this down because I only want it to impact this little section. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here in this section to make it just bring up those dark areas to where they're not quite so shadowy. The other thing that my adjustments have done is make these two bright areas too bright. We've lost a little detail in those. So to fix that, I'm going to go get the detail extractor. So hold the shift key down and click on detail extractor. Again, grab the control point because if you can see, applying it to the whole image really overdoes the structure in the rest of the image and makes it a little too much what I call crunchy granola. So I'm going to click right here on the spot that I want it to be applied to and kind of bring it down some to where it's not hitting everything. And then add another control point over here on this area where we've lost detail. And you'll see that it brought it down just enough and maybe just one more over here. Those particular areas now have detail restored. So I'm pretty much done with that image. And I think it achieved the purpose I wanted and has the treatment. You know, one thing I do sometimes is once I finish an image like this in Color Efex, I'll just for fun open it in Analog to see if there's something really unique and magical that will give me something that I wasn't really thinking of. But in this case, for this demo, I'm just going to end here.
So one of the things, I'm just going to add a few things to what she had mentioned that might be helpful, is that I star over here on the left side. I star the ones. I'm pretty conservative in Color Efex Pro in a lot of ways, because like we talked about, there's certain things that you want in everything, which is the glamour glow, the pro contrast, and the vignette filter. And I just need to move this. So the other thing that I do, if you can see, is I always have my histogram open on the lower right, where you see its loop and histogram, because one of the things, like Shelley likes to go back in with control points, I don't. I like to do as little as possible. So I want to watch as much as I can, watch my my histogram. And so it's always there, so I know when it's crawling up the walls, I have to be careful what I'm going to do. So
Laurie, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. When we switched over, some people can't see your screen, so I'm going to recommend everybody just refresh your browser and you should be able to see her screen. Thank you.
Okay, so do I need to begin again, or we're okay?
Oh, keep going. You're fine. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So, and the other thing, I'm just going to add a little bit to what Shelley just said. When you're using the sliders, we have a tendency to just, if you're not sure what it is you want, what look you want, what feel you want, go way over. Because if we just do it incrementally, we won't know. So if you want to, like, if I want more color, well, I'm not going to get that there, but if I'm going to want more dynamic contrast, see what happens when you put the slider all the way over. And I think that helps us, because again, there are times that I do not know what I want until I get in and I start playing. The other thing that I recommend to all my students is to take one image and do post-production 5 different ways and then print them. I print my images up because I think it's really important, and they're all over my, I mean, I live in a loft that has just so many images laying around, but then you can compare and say, well, what feeling do I get by analog? What feeling do I get with black and white? And so that's part of my process. But those are all the things that you need to do. Those are the basics for infrared. Also, you can save a recipe. So if you are a person that likes to do the same thing, or they're all, you know, from the same shoot, you can create your own recipe. So I'm just going to go quickly into analog, because as I said, we are playing a lot with that right now. And it's a blast. Because there's no right or wrong. This is just, to me, it's like a coloring book for me. Analog, sorry. And so we can just play with it. We still have a lot of the features. You still have your histogram there. But again, if you go and it's just fabulous what you guys have created here. So we can go into all these different things like double exposures, and you get like these really fascinating emotional feelings. Like I don't even, this takes me back to like images from the 1800s. It looks like a wet plate, and some of them are wet plate. So again, I would just take these, you know, take an image, play with it with different ways. I know what my story is like, she is beneath the roots. Is she growing roots? Is she being protected? This is my favorite. From this one, I just love how, you know, and of course, I don't think I have a time right now, but I would burn in the edges. I would sharpen it a little bit so it still looked like an infrared, but it's like, it totally changes the feeling or the emotion of the image. And what's great too is that you can split it so you can see what it looked like originally, or you can have 2 separate images. You can say, oh, so this to me is as much about, you know, the technology, but it's also, what are you trying to say? What happens when she becomes duplicated in the bottom? What happens when there's this starburst? And I, you know, be careful that it doesn't become gimmicky, but if it's part of your story, with infrared, just it opens the door for a lot of those different opportunities. The other one that's really fun is motion. And, you know, like, it was talked about before, Shelley said that she does intentional camera movement. Well, look what happens when you do it in here. I mean, there are so many possibilities, and you can move down, you can move this down so that we can change, you know, we can change it if that's where your eye wants to go. And again, I don't always, it's not always the end result, but what it is it gets me to be involved with my image and see the possibilities, because sometimes, you know, especially shooting as long as I have, sometimes I get into this like container on this is the way the images need to look, and or this is what I want to say, but maybe there's something else. That's what I found going back to older images right now, is like my stories are different because I've gone through, you know, we've all gone through paradigm shifts. So we have 2 minutes, so I don't know, Laurie, how you want to work this with if there's Q&A or anything, because I want to lose time.
Yeah, there are actually quite a few questions. If you can hang with us for another 5-10 minutes, is that okay?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, great. So folks, we have a lot of questions. In fact, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, so I'm just going to let you know up front. So I grabbed a few that were most asked, and so hopefully we can cover some of those right now. So Colin is asking, could the ladies say what light loss in stops occurs when using a screw-on R72 filter, please?
Okay. I, in all honesty, don't know the number of stops of loss, but I will tell you that I started off experimenting with infrared using external filters. It's very difficult. You do lose a significant amount of light. It's so much so that you can't really focus with the filter on. So typically when you're using an external filter, the best way to shoot is you put it on a tripod, you focus, lock in the focus, put the filter on, set your exposure, and then photograph. And if you want to recompose, you have to actually take the filter off, recompose, refocus, put the filter back on. It will yield interesting results. I just honestly believe, given the cost, you know, you can buy lightly used converted infrared cameras on eBay. I've had good luck with those. The converted camera experience is so much better. It's like normal shooting that I don't really encourage the filters.
Okay. Next question from Ross. I have a IR converted camera, a 850 for black and white. Do I need to be concerned with getting a proper white balance, especially when I am converting to black and white in Nik?
That's a great question. That is an excellent question. You are one of the lucky ones. You do not need to worry about white balance, because the only way to process an image that's in the 820, 850 range is black and white. It just will not yield interesting colors for any other kind of treatment. So you don't really, I mean, the white balance will change the tones in your image some, but I've done tests side by side. It's not as enough of a change to warrant going through the hassle of creating the custom camera profile, creating all that. You can make the change in post to tweak the tone. So no, you do not need one. You are good to go.
You're lucky.
Yeah, very.
All right. John is asking, what is 720 conversion? And then Joan wanted to know, do you always use 720 conversion?
Okay.
I usually do. 720 is my go-to because that was what it was with infrared film. I do use 655. Shelley is more broader on that. I do have the full spectrum camera. The 655 gives you more color, but you know, when I'm doing skin tones, the 720 is the best for me. And Shelley will add that.
Yeah, you know, the first question about what is a 720. The infrared conversion, the infrared spectrum is split. The closer you get down to the visible spectrum, the more mixture of infrared and visible light you have. The closer you get to the far end, like the 850 conversion we were just talking about, the less visible light you have. And what that means to you as a photographer is that if you want the false colors in infrared, you want to be down near the 590. There's different options: 590, 665, 720, and 850. The 590, you're going to get a whole lot of color, a lot of visible light. 665, a little less so. 720, that most closely mimics traditional infrared. So it's kind of the go-to for a lot of people. And then the 850 will give you these really intense, high contrast black and white images. I started off both Laurie and I have, I use mine more than Laurie does, full spectrum cameras. And we don't have the time to go into a lot of detail on it, but you might look it up if you're interested, where you can actually change spectrums with using external filters that don't have the same problems as like an R72 external filter. But I have over the years come to where almost always I either have a 720 filter on my camera or a 665. I rarely change the filter anymore. So if you're just getting started and you just want one camera, one conversion, I highly recommend either 665 or 720. Gives you the best of all worlds.
Okay, great. William is asking, is the camera very important? Example, DSLR versus mirrorless.
There are some very definite differences. Laurie uses a DSLR and I use a mirrorless. Laurie, you want to say something about the DSLR?
Yeah, I mean, so my full spectrum is a mirrorless, and I'm just not. I am old school. I like the DSLR. I like to see the image, not how it's going to look. I just like it better. It doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong. I do think as I get older that I might want to go more with a mirrorless because they can be lighter. But DSLRs, I know that I am getting what I see. There's, it's especially with the full frame cameras, you get what you see where you don't as much. I mean, Shelley and I have this conversation all the time, but it's real personal, and she loves, you love the mirrorless.
The mirrorless. Yeah, and I think the big difference is, honestly, Laurie started in infrared in the film days. So she was used to looking through the viewfinder and seeing the world in visible spectrum, and then having to, with her own mind, convert that to infrared and what it was going to look like. I started infrared in the digital era. I love the fact that with a mirrorless converted camera, when I put the viewfinder up to my eye, I see the world in infrared. I don't want to have to take the time to mentally convert visible to infrared. But there are variances between the two types. There are pluses and minuses. The seeing the world in infrared in a mirrorless versus seeing it in visible in a DSLR is one. The other is that DSLRs typically don't have as many problems with hotspots as many mirrorlesses do. There's a lot of information on the web about that too, what exactly the problems are. But I would say talk to one of the conversion companies. They are more than happy to have a conversation with you if you're interested in getting a camera. They'll tell you what works, what doesn't work, what's best for what you want to achieve. Before you do that, go out on the internet and look at different types of infrared photography so that you have some sort of basis to say, I really want to take this kind of image, and then they can help you figure out which one is best for you.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do when we teach our A to Z class and our infrared classes is that we tell them, if you don't have a camera, rent one. So that you can actually see what you like. Do you like a mirrorless? Do you, and it's pretty inexpensive, and it's a really good way to test it. Yeah. Same thing with the cutoff filter, what, nanometer you're working on.
Yeah. Laurie, is it okay for me to give the name of the company, Laurie Rubin,
sure,
that we recommend for rent? Okay, lensrentals.com has a number of infrared cameras for rental if you want to give it a try that way.
Oh, that's a great idea. Very good. Okay. All right. Ron is asking, Shelley, your Cape Cod image appears quite grainy. Was this done on purpose, or is this an artifact of the presentation technology?
No, it was done on purpose. It was part of the texture that I applied to it. So it was definitely grainy, and that was on purpose.
Okay, great. All right. I think we're coming up to the end here. So like I said, we didn't get through all your questions. Please visit the laurieklein.com website. And gosh, if you have an opportunity to go on one of their workshops or events, that's great. Get their book. These two I've known forever, it seems like. So when I think infrared, I do think of Laurie and Shelley. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I'll let Laurie and Shelley, if you have any last words, and then we'll go ahead and close out the webinar.
Sure. The one thing I would like to say is visit the website, and if nothing else, sign up for Visual Visionaries, which is kind of our artistic tribe. and you'll get the newsletter on a regular basis. We don't send out very many, but when we do, it's either announcing a special event that you might enjoy, a workshop, or new products. And it can really be useful if you're getting into infrared. But I hope we have inspired you. I hope, if nothing else, you've gotten some great ideas for wonderful images you want to make.
Yeah. And with Visual Visionaries, most of the people on there are infrared shooters. So it's a good way for you to see other people's work and say, what are you doing? How did you get this? Especially if it's something that that resonates for you. And it's just play. Don't take it seriously. It's a wonderful medium, and it's an incredibly expressive medium. And I think Shelley and I, one of the things that is wonderful is that it keeps growing. The technology keeps expanding. We keep going deeper, and so it's not static at all. So, Laurie Rubin, thank you so much for having us on. This was really a pleasure, and we hope we inspired a lot of people. Yeah.
Great. Thanks to both of you, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.